Our next guest is a best-selling author of more than 5 dozen nonfiction books, including the biographies of Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and his latest, Magic: The Life of Earvin Magic Johnson, available now wherever you get your books. We welcome Roland Lazenby. And Roland, I remember the first book of yours that I read was Blood on the Horns, and I was fascinated by the level of access and detail you got in being able to write something about a team that was very storied and pretty much was at the end of its run. How, I'm never going to write a book, but for those of us who may want to write a book someday, I'm just going to nod in a certain direction.
Maybe, maybe.
How do you, how do you go about getting that kind of access?
You know, I've been working with that team 4.5, 5 years by then. I'd done a series of books. They were typical basketball books. I was hired by the Chicago Tribune book division, but really got to know people. First of all, I got to know Tex Winter, and he became a very good friend. And I really wanted to learn the triangle, so I was coaching youth basketball, and I could get him on the phone anytime I wanted, simply because I was just running the triangle and teaching it to kids, and I found it easy, and Tex loved that, and we just hit it off really well. But I also got to know a lot of other people, and as things got more complicated, and actually from the very first interview I was supposed to do with Phil Jackson, he was going to give me 5 minutes. I really prepared and asked a really good question, and he sort of jumped at it like a big old fat bass hits a fly, and I ended up with 2 hours with him, used every tape in my bag. It was cassette tapes back then. And he revealed, this was in 94, he revealed to me how much he and Jerry Krause had come to a parting of the ways. They literally hated each other. And in the process, Phil told me some lies, but he told me a lot of truthful things. And I just had this knowledge of things. And Tex was sort of loyal to both men. And so many of the Bulls' problems in that Last Dance season finally were about Phil and Jerry Krause, and with Tex in the middle trying to sort of hold things together. And of course, in the middle of all that was Michael and his fury with Jerry Krause, because for years, Jerry Krause had sort of stupidly antagonized Michael. And it was just a fight for credit in a lot of ways, but there were other things that factored in. Scottie Pippen's money. And I just couldn't believe that it would end like it did. And I kept going through that season with them. And, I'd gotten pretty good about picking my time to get one-on-ones. And I worked very hard to get one-on-ones with Michael. And then I didn't have to work as hard to do that with other people, but Michael was a real challenge. And I got those, and I got a good book.
Roland, when it came to the Magic book, you have some exclusive interviews in there that are also super impressive. Were there any people in the process of reporting this where you had a similar experience to Phil Jackson? And I wonder, as time has gone on, are people less or more reluctant to speak to you as things can get spun out in headlines more these days because of, this sort of gossip attention economy we've got going on?
Yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a really big context guy. I like to go deep into family background. I'm a big believer in culture, a big believer that basketball is a huge factor in cultural understanding. And that in some ways, I was just trying to do an archaeology project with Magic. He was there in Lansing, Michigan in the 70s during the school busing crisis. And that had a deep impact on his family, particularly on his brother, Larry. And I had been a 24-year-old varsity head coach during that same period, not in Lansing. I was down in the Virginia mountains in Blacksburg. But I was fascinated with it because I knew the kids of that age. And I was just eager to document how black and white culture, after all these years of very sad and horrific racial history in this country, how those cultures started to come together over sport, and in this case, obviously, particularly basketball, and how they did it around this. I've dealt with a lot of teenagers, 15-year-olds. The 15-year-old Magic Johnson I met through literally dozens and dozens of interviews with his coaches and Charles Tucker and the coach's family. And he's really one of the most impressive 15-year-olds probably God's ever put on this earth.
What was most impressive about him?
His tremendous emotional intelligence. His and I mean he obviously had things. He'd had reading difficulties in grade school, and he had chosen to work at the advice of a teacher to overcome that. He had diction problems, but he had an emotional intelligence that just flashed right and left. And to go with that, he had this integrity. He was put on the spot by the school administration before he ever played a game of basketball at Everett High School. He was put on the spot to come in and solve problems that had been going on 4 to 5 years there. Nasty problems. White kids throwing rocks at the first buses that arrived with black students, fights in the hallways. You had some racial problems at Michigan State in the basketball program, and all of it just created this really bad mojo. Plus, in 1972, Earvin's brother was one of 5 black boys right before Christmas, the first group of black boys to play at Everett, who were kicked off the basketball team and by the white coaches. And this had you can imagine the effect that would have in the community. And the guy who was called in to sort out this dismissal was Dr. Charles Tucker, who had been a very good junior college basketball player, was in the process of getting his PhD in psychology, but would go on not only to become Magic Johnson's youthful advisor and advise him for years, but would become the advisor and agent to Isaiah Thomas, Mark Aguirre, a whole array of figures over the years. And so it was sort of a seminal moment in the culture because the people that Charles Tucker came to represent would be some of the most powerful in basketball. And Charles Tucker himself would be very powerful.
How did you see that exhibited in Magic's life? You talk about how he had such an amazing emotional intelligence as he began to rise through, pop culture, as you say, in basketball, bridging this. How powerful did he become when it came to changing the way people looked at the NBA?
Oh, he set the tone. The NBA had been a troubled enterprise for decades. And for a pretty good while, the only way the NBA was selling tickets at any successful level was to pair games and have double headers with the Harlem Globetrotters. And fans would come to see that great fun. But the NBA was a lower rung American sport. There's just no two ways about it. It was it had a core of really good fans, but just not enough of them. And that persisted through integration and into the 60s. The Celtics with Bill Russell would win those 11 NBA championships, an absolutely amazing run. And yet they would never sell out their home opener each fall the next year. Of course, today, the fan base is global. It's deep. Basketball has some problems, obviously, still, but the figures who really came along and delivered American basketball. Guys like Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Larry Bird. These are global figures. And in particular, in terms of the black males, this is not a political black power. When you speak of black power, traditionally, we think of that as political power in this country. But another thing I was looking at was the empowerment of black males around the busing crisis in the 70s. And it was fascinating stuff. It also, of course, is about the acquisition of power by a figure such as Magic Johnson, who is rising in basketball. He forms this great relationship with this new owner of the Lakers, this playboy, Jerry Buss, and they basically are playboy friends. Jerry Buss in his 40s, Magic in his late teens, and they're just living it up in LA. And this begins to cause very serious chemistry problems with the Lakers. And I think that's significant because the Lakers, in their great Showtime teams, had a fair amount of chemistry issues to overcome because Magic got all of this power. I need to add one thing to that. Magic's personal integrity, he had some issues as things went on. All humans do. But as a teen, he was given this power by the administration to solve problems, but that never corrupted him. He would hold out for concessions for Black students in this integrated setting. When problems got tough his junior year, he just called his own assembly and called the school out to the football stadium, which the same principal who empowered him freaked out over this. What's this kid doing calling an assembly? And Magic got everybody out there and said, look, we got to get along. We got games to win. We can't be having these issues. And it was more sort of a pep rally for unity, but the school officials were scared to death that it was going to create, that could have exploded easily. In situation after situation, he just delivered, and he did it without, there's no sign. He had plenty of confidence, but he never, ever got the big head and, tried to abuse that power.
Thinking about all the content that's come out over the last few years surrounding the Showtime Lakers and really Magic Johnson. You got Magic's out his own multi-part documentary on Apple. You have the Lakers had their multi-part docuseries on Hulu. You had obviously Winning Time, the fictionalized TV show that was based on Jeff Pearlman's book about Showtime. None of these pieces of content did I ever hear that part about Magic having that kind of power, wielding that kind of power as a teenager. And I'm particularly surprised that his own documentary wouldn't even bring up something like that, which I would feel would be a seminal moment for someone to think about. That was the moment I realized, wow, my voice is a lot louder and goes a lot further than your average star, of the football team or the basketball team, whatever. How is Magic's relationship with that power dynamic, do you think?
I think it's why we see in Forbes today that he's a billionaire. He's still chasing Michael, and that is a dynamic that drives a lot of this. Michael's got $3 billion, Magic's got $1 billion, and those two are still going at it. They're friends, but there is a heavy competition there. He is such a control freak, and he was a control freak from a young age. And he, as Dale Beard, his high school teammate, his best man in his wedding, explained to me, I couldn't play my game. I had to play the way Magic wanted me to play, or I wasn't going to play. Now, that wasn't just true of the players. The coaches of that team had to coach the way Magic needed them to coach. And he didn't say that to him. He controlled the whole thing with the way he played. And he changed coaching with that. And it factors into a lot of things. He is very much a control freak.